The crack of the gavel reverberated through the courthouse like a gunshot, silencing the crowd gathered for the auction. Penelope O'Brien flinched, her hands trembling against the rough hemp bindings that secured her wrists. The year was 1876, and her entire life was about to be sold to the highest bidder in the dusty town of Opal, Colorado. "Next item," announced the auctioneer, his voice slick with disinterest. "One female domestic worker, 23 years of age, good health, 5 years of service to cover debts of one Franklin O'Brien, deceased." Penelope swallowed hard, fighting back tears as she was pushed forward onto the wooden platform. The summer sun beat down through the high windows, casting harsh light across the crowd of mostly men ranchers, merchants, and miners from across the territory. Her father's gambling debts had finally claimed everything, including her freedom. When he died 3 weeks earlier, the creditors had been quick to invoke the rarely used but still legal indentured service provision for outstanding debts. From the back of the room, Dawson Calloway watched with narrowed eyes, his weathered Stetson pulled low. At 32, he'd seen his share of injustice on the frontier, but the practice of debt servitude still turned his stomach. He leaned against the back wall, arms crossed over his chest, taking in the woman's dignified posture despite her circumstances. "Starting bid is $200 for 5 years' service," the auctioneer continued, eyeing the crowd. "Do I hear 250? A portly man in the front row raised his hand. 250. 300, called another, the owner of the saloon on the edge of town. Penelope recognized him and felt ice in her veins. His establishment had a reputation for employing women for more than just serving drinks. Bids continued rising as Penelope stared straight ahead, refusing to let these men see her break. 5 years of her life being haggled over like a sack of flour. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father's gambling had steadily worsened over the years. Now, with no family and no funds, she had nothing but her pride. 500, called a voice that made her stomach turn. Oliver Winthrop, the wealthy mine owner whose advances she'd rejected more than once when she'd worked as a seamstress in town. 550, countered the saloon keeper. 600, Winthrop sneered, looking directly at Penelope. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. 600 going once. $1,000. The voice from the back of the room silenced the crowd. Heads turned to see Dawson Calloway stepping forward, his spurs jingling slightly with each deliberate step. $1,000, he repeated, his voice steady and clear. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "We have 1,000 from Mr. Calloway. Going once. Going twice." He glanced at Winthrop, who scowled but remained silent. "Sold." Relief flooded Penelope's body before quickly giving way to a new fear. She'd heard of Dawson Calloway. Most people in Opal had. He owned one of the largest cattle spreads in the territory, the Silver Creek Ranch, some 15 miles outside of town. He was known to be fair in his dealings but private to the point of reclusiveness. What would he want with her? Dawson approached the clerk's desk, counting out bills from a leather pouch. He signed the necessary papers without a word, his face unreadable. Only when he turned toward Penelope did she catch a glimpse of something unexpected in his eyes, not triumph or ownership, but a quiet anger that seemed directed at the situation rather than at her. "Miss O'Brien," he said with a slight nod, "if you'll come with me." Penelope found her voice at last. "What exactly will be expected of me, Mr. Calloway?" He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I need a housekeeper at the ranch. Nothing more." She didn't believe him couldn't afford to, but had no choice but to follow as the clerk cut her bindings. Dawson led her outside to where a wagon waited, driven by an older man with a gray beard. "This is Hank, my foreman," Dawson explained as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "He'll drive us back to Silver Creek." The ride out of town was silent save for the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of the horse's hooves. Penelope stared at the receding buildings of Opal, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake by not fighting harder against this arrangement. But what choice did she have? The law was clear. Her father's debts were now her burden. "I want to be clear about something, Miss O'Brien," Dawson said suddenly, breaking the long silence as the wagon rolled along the dusty trail. "I don't believe in indentured service. It's a practice that should have died with the last century." She looked at him cautiously. "Then why did you pay for me?" "Because the alternatives seemed worse." His jaw tightened. "Winthrop and Fleming aren't known for their kind treatment of women." "And you are?" she challenged, surprised by her own boldness. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm known for running a decent ranch where people are paid fair wages for honest work. That's what I'm offering you." "I don't understand. The papers say I own 5 years of your service. I don't want that. I'll tear them up once we reach the ranch. You'll work as my housekeeper for as long as you choose, with fair pay and your own quarters." Penelope stared at him, searching for the lie in his words. "Why would you pay $1,000 just to give me my freedom?" Dawson looked ahead at the rolling landscape, the distant mountains turning purple in the late afternoon light. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people are trapped by circumstances beyond their control." Beside them, Hank cleared his throat. "Boss is a soft touch beneath all that leather and steel," he said with a grin that quickly disappeared when Dawson shot him a look. Penelope didn't know what to make of him. In her 23 years, men had rarely shown her anything but self-interest. Her father had loved her, yes, but his addiction to gambling had always come first. Could Dawson Calloway truly be offering help with no expectations? "You don't have to decide right now," Dawson said. "We'll reach the ranch by nightfall. You can have a good meal, a night's rest, and think on it." Silver Creek Ranch came into view as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley. The main house was larger than Penelope had expected, a 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings and corrals dotted the property, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the lush grassland. "Home sweet home," Hank announced as he guided the horses toward the house. A woman in her 50s emerged from the front door as the wagon pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're back later than expected," she called. "Had business in town," Dawson replied, jumping down from the wagon before turning to offer Penelope his hand. "Mrs. Palmer, this is Miss Penelope O'Brien. She'll be staying with us for a while." The woman gave Penelope a warm smile. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss O'Brien. I'm Martha Palmer, the cook around here. You must be exhausted after your journey. Come inside and I'll fix you something to eat." The interior of the house was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's residence. Clean, orderly, with simple but quality furnishings. Martha led Penelope to the kitchen at the back of the house, where the smell of fresh baked bread and stew made her stomach growl embarrassingly. Sit," Martha urged, already ladling stew into a bowl. "You look like you could use a good meal." Dawson appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss O'Brien, I've asked Martha to prepare the room at the end of the hall for you. It has its own entrance if you prefer your privacy. We can discuss the details of your position tomorrow, after you've rested." Penelope nodded, still wary but too exhausted to argue. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." After he'd gone, Martha placed the bowl of stew and a slice of bread in front of her. "He's a good man," she said quietly. "Don't let his reserve fool you. He says he's going to tear up my indenture papers," Penelope said, still unable to believe it. "Is that the kind of thing he normally does?" Martha smiled. "Dawson has his own sense of justice. Always has." She poured a cup of coffee and set it beside Penelope's bowl. Now eat up, then I'll show you to your room. That night, lying in a surprisingly comfortable bed with clean linens, Penelope stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of her situation. Yesterday, she'd been facing the auction block with nothing but fear for her future. Today, she was in a clean, private room with a full stomach and an offer that seemed too good to be true. Could she trust Dawson Calloway? Or was this just a more elaborate trap? Dawn broke with the sounds of the ranch coming to life, roosters crowing, men calling to each other as they headed to the barn, horses nickering for their morning feed. Penelope rose, splashed water on her face from the basin provided, and dressed in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, her only possessions. She found Martha in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. The older woman looked up with a smile. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Penelope admitted. "How can I help?" "You're eager to earn your keep. I like that." Martha nodded toward a basket of eggs. "You can start by scrambling those for the men's breakfast. They'll be in shortly." As Penelope worked, the kitchen door opened, and Dawson entered, already dressed for the day's work in a clean shirt and worn denim pants, his boots dusty from the morning rounds. "Miss O'Brien," he said with a nod, "I hope you found your room comfortable." "Very, thank you." She kept her eyes on the eggs sizzling in the pan. "Mr. Calloway, I've been thinking about your offer, and—" he poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "It's very generous." Suspiciously so. She finally looked up at him. "I'd like to understand why you're doing this before I accept." He leaned against the counter, studying her for a moment. "Fair enough. Walk with me after breakfast and we'll talk." The meal was a lively affair, with 6 ranch hands filing in to fill the large table in the kitchen. They were respectful to Penelope, introducing themselves with shy nods before diving into their food. She noted that Dawson ate with his men rather than separately, another surprise. After the men had gone back to work, Dawson led Penelope outside and down a path toward a small rise overlooking the ranch. The morning was clear and crisp, with the promise of heat later in the day. "My father built this ranch from nothing," he began as they walked. "Started with 10 head of cattle and this plot of land. By the time he died 15 years ago, Silver Creek was one of the most successful operations in the territory." "You've obviously maintained that success," Penelope observed. He nodded. "I was lucky. I had a father who taught me well and left me something of value. Not everyone gets that chance." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "When I was 17, my mother fell ill. We needed money for a specialist in Denver. My father was away driving cattle to Kansas City, so I took a loan from a man named Blackwell in town." Penelope listened, beginning to understand. "When I couldn't repay it fast enough, he had me arrested and sentenced to 6 months' labor in his mine. Said it was the only way to work off the debt." Dawson's expression hardened at the memory. It was illegal even then, but the local judge was in his pocket. "I spent those 6 months watching men die from accidents and exhaustion while Blackwell grew richer." "What happened?" "My father returned, paid off the debt, and brought me home. Mother died anyway." He looked out over the ranch, his profile etched against the morning sky. "I promised myself then that if I ever had the power to prevent someone else from suffering that kind of injustice, I would." Penelope was silent for a long moment. "So yesterday at the auction, I couldn't stand by and watch." He turned to face her directly. "The papers from the auction are in my desk. We can burn them right now if you'd like, and you can take the first stage out of Opal tomorrow with money enough to start fresh somewhere else. Or you can stay and work here for fair wages, for as long as it suits you." "Why would I choose to stay?" she asked softly. "Because starting over alone isn't easy, especially for a woman. Here, you'd have safety, respect, and time to figure out your next steps. He shrugged slightly. But it's your choice, Miss O'Brien. Your freedom is not conditional. Penelope looked down at the ranch below the sturdy buildings, the grazing cattle, the men going about their work. It was peaceful here, orderly. A stark contrast to the chaos her life had become in recent months as her father's gambling spiraled out of control. If I stay, she said slowly, what exactly would my duties include? The main house needs tending. Martha handles the cooking, but she's getting on in years and could use help with cleaning, laundry, and general upkeep. I have business papers that need organizing from time to time. Beyond that, we can discuss fair compensation and any other arrangements you might need. It was more than generous. It was the kind of opportunity that simply didn't exist for women in her position, unmarried, penniless, and with no family to return to. I'd like to stay, she decided. For now, at least, until I can pay you back. Dawson frowned. There's nothing to pay back. The money I spent was my choice. Nevertheless, I have my own sense of justice, Mr. Calloway. She met his gaze steadily. I don't take charity. A smile touched his lips, reaching his eyes this time. I see we're going to have to negotiate terms, Miss O'Brien. Indeed we are. That afternoon, they burned the indenture papers in the study fireplace. Penelope watched the flames consume the document that had nearly stolen her future, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you, she said simply. Dawson nodded, his face solemn. Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss O'Brien. The first week at Silver Creek passed in a blur of new routines and adjustments. Penelope rose each day before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the main house, which, while not neglected, clearly benefited from a woman's touch. In the afternoons, she took on the mending of shirts and linens, sitting on the front porch with needle and thread while watching the activities of the ranch unfold before her. She learned quickly that Dawson was respected by his men not through fear but through fairness. He worked alongside them when needed, never asking more of them than he was willing to do himself. He was quiet but not unfriendly, reserved rather than cold. And she caught him watching her sometimes with a thoughtfulness that made her heart beat a little faster. On her 8th day at Silver Creek, Penelope was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Dawson approached, leading his horse. Miss O'Brien, he called. I'm riding out to check the north pasture. Would you care to join me? It might be good for you to see more of the ranch. She hesitated, surprised by the invitation. I've never ridden before, Mr. Calloway. No better time to learn. He smiled. I have a gentle mare that would suit you. Unless you'd prefer to stay with your laundry. Penelope looked at the half-hung sheets, then back at Dawson's expectant face. I suppose the laundry can wait. 20 minutes later, she was seated atop a chestnut mare named Poppy, gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles as Dawson led them at a gentle walk away from the ranch buildings. Relax your shoulders, he instructed. Move with her rhythm, not against it. Gradually, Penelope found her balance, the initial terror giving way to cautious enjoyment. The day was perfect for riding clear skies, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers dotting the grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. You're doing well, Dawson commented as they rode side by side. A natural. I doubt that, she laughed. But it's not as terrifying as I first thought. They rode for nearly an hour, cresting a hill that overlooked a stream where a small herd of cattle grazed. Dawson dismounted and helped Penelope down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her body. This is my favorite spot on the ranch, he said, leading her to a large boulder overlooking the water. My father used to bring me here when I was a boy. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching an eagle circle lazily overhead. Penelope stole glances at Dawson's profile, noting the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the slight lines at the corners of his eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Tell me about your father," he said suddenly, "if you don't mind." Penelope sighed, running her fingers through the grass beside the boulder. "He wasn't always as he was at the end. Before my mother died, he was different, responsible, hard-working. He owned a small saddler's shop in town. But after we lost her to typhoid, something in him just broke. Grief can change a person," Dawson said quietly. "Yes, the gambling started small, a card game now and then. A way to escape, I think. But it grew until it consumed him." She plucked a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. "I tried to help him stop, begged him, really. But by then, the debts were already mounting. And he believed the next big win would solve everything. That's the curse of it. The hope that never dies." "Did you know him?" she asked, curious about his insight. Dawson shook his head. "Not well. I saw him in town sometimes when I went in for supplies. He seemed troubled. That's a kind way of putting it." She tossed the flower aside. "The worst part is, I'm still angry with him." "Is that terrible? To be angry at someone who's gone?" "No," Dawson said firmly. "It's honest. He left you in an impossible situation, regardless of his intentions." His understanding loosened something in Penelope's chest, a knot of guilt she'd been carrying since her father's death. "Thank you for saying that." They stayed by the stream for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Penelope had expected. Dawson told her about his plans for the ranch, about the challenge of the coming cattle drive to Denver, about the books he ordered from St. Louis to fill the long winter evenings. As they rode back to the ranch, Penelope found herself smiling more than she had in months. There was something about Dawson Calloway that made her feel safe, not just physically protected, but emotionally secure. He listened when she spoke. He valued her opinions. And there was a gentleness beneath his strength that drew her to him despite her determination to remain independent. Back at the ranch, he helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an awareness, a possibility. "Thank you for showing me the ranch," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "My pleasure, Miss O'Brien." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we could make it a regular outing? There's much more to see." "I'd like that." As the weeks passed, Penelope settled into life at Silver Creek with surprising ease. The riding lessons continued, becoming the highlight of her days. Dawson proved to be a patient teacher, and soon she was confident enough to ride out alone for short distances, enjoying the freedom and solitude after years of being confined to town. Martha became a friend as well as a colleague, sharing stories of her life and subtly guiding Penelope in her duties around the ranch. The older woman had been with the Calloway family since Dawson was a child, and her affection for him was evident in the way she fussed over his meals and mended his clothes. "He was such a serious little boy," Martha told Penelope one evening as they prepared supper. "Always trying to be just like his father. The spitting image of him too, except around the eyes. Those he got from his mother." "What was she like?" Penelope asked, peeling potatoes at the table. "Elizabeth? She was a lady through and through. Came from a good family in Boston, but she loved this wild country and the man who brought her to it. Taught Dawson to read when he was barely old enough to hold a book. Had him reciting poetry before he could ride a horse." Martha smiled at the memory. "She would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" "You've got spirit, girl. Not everyone walks through what you've walked through with their heads still high." The ranch hands, too, accepted Penelope's presence with good-natured respect. She learned their names and stories. Tom and Sam, brothers who'd come west after the war. Miguel, whose family had ranched in the territory for generations. Eli, barely 20 and eager to prove himself. Joseph, the oldest at 55, who could still outride men half his age. And Hank, the foreman, whose gruff exterior hid a kind heart. Only with Dawson did Penelope feel a lingering uncertainty. Their rides together had become the foundation of a friendship that seemed to deepen with each conversation. She found herself looking forward to those hours alone with him, sharing thoughts and observations, learning the details of his life as he learned hers. But there were moments a look held too long. A hand offered to help her over a stream, the brush of shoulders as they walked that suggested something more than friendship might be possible. It was a possibility that both thrilled and terrified her. One evening in late July, nearly 2 months after her arrival at Silver Creek, Penelope was in the study organizing Dawson's business correspondence when he entered, looking tired after a long day of work. "Don't let me interrupt," he said, moving to leave when he saw her at his desk. "You're not interrupting. It's your study after all." She smiled, gesturing to the neat piles she'd created. "I've sorted everything by date and type of business. The cattle sales are here, supply purchases here, and correspondence with the bank in this pile." He surveyed her work with appreciation. "You've done more in an afternoon than I would have managed in a week." "Thank you. It's satisfying work, actually. I've always enjoyed creating order from chaos. A valuable skill." He hesitated, then crossed to a cabinet in the corner of the room. "Would you care for a drink? I was about to have one myself." The invitation surprised her. They'd shared meals with the others, of course, but never a quiet drink. Just the two of them. "Yes, thank you." He poured 2 small glasses of amber liquid and handed one to her. "It's bourbon, from Kentucky, a small indulgence." Penelope sipped cautiously, the liquor burning pleasantly as it went down. "It's good. Strong, but good." Dawson settled into the leather chair by the fireplace, gesturing for her to take the one opposite. "How are you finding life at Silver Creek, now that you've had some time to adjust?" "Honestly, it's the most at peace I've felt in years." She traced the rim of her glass with one finger. "I wake up each morning knowing what's expected of me, doing work that matters, surrounded by good people. It's healing." His expression softened. "I'm glad to hear it." "I've been meaning to ask you something," she said, gathering her courage. "Why haven't you married, Mr. Calloway? A man with a ranch this size usually has a wife to manage the household." The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I suppose I've never met a woman who wanted this life as much as I do. Or perhaps I've been too focused on building what my father started to notice if I did. And now," his eyes met hers, darkening slightly, "now I find myself noticing quite a bit." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Penelope felt a flush creep up her neck under his steady gaze. "Miss O'Brien Penelope," he said, her name sounding intimate in his deep voice. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Hank burst in without waiting for a response. "Boss, we've got trouble. Eli just rode in. Says he saw men moving our cattle across the North Ridge, at least 50 head. Dawson was on his feet instantly, all trace of the intimate moment gone. "Rustlers. How many men?" Eli counted 6, all armed. "Get the men. Tell them to bring rifles. We ride in 10 minutes. He turned to Penelope. "I'm sorry, but duty calls." She nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. Be careful. Lock the doors once we're gone. We shouldn't be back until morning." He hesitated, then added, "We'll continue our conversation when I return." After they'd gone, the house felt eerily quiet. Martha had retired early with a headache, leaving Penelope alone with her thoughts. She secured the doors as Dawson had instructed, then restlessly paced the empty rooms. The study still held the lingering scent of Dawson's soap and the faint aroma of bourbon. Penelope returned to the chair where she'd sat earlier, replaying their conversation in her mind. What had he been about to say before Hank interrupted? And what was she hoping he'd say? The truth was increasingly difficult to deny. Somewhere between the auction block and this moment, she had fallen in love with Dawson Calloway. His quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his gentle kindness all had worked their way into her heart, despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance. But what future could there be for them? He was a successful rancher with a legacy to maintain. She was a penniless woman with nothing to offer but her labor. Even if he returned her feelings, and there were moments when she was almost certain he did, the gap between their stations seemed insurmountable. Sleep proved elusive that night. Penelope lay awake listening for the return of the men, imagining confrontations with armed rustlers, accidents in the darkness, shots fired in anger or desperation. By dawn, she was exhausted but still alert, her nerves stretched to breaking. She was in the kitchen helping Martha prepare a large breakfast. They'll be hungry when they return. Mark my words, when they heard hoofbeats in the yard. Both women rushed to the door to see the men riding in, dusty and tired but apparently unharmed. Penelope's eyes sought Dawson immediately, relief flooding through her when she spotted him dismounting from his horse. He looked up at that moment, as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes locked across the yard. Something in his expression made her breath catch a weariness, yes, but also a determination, a resolve. "Get those cattle settled in the south pasture," he called to the men. "Hank, see to it that everyone gets breakfast and then some rest. You all earned it." He crossed the yard with purposeful strides, his spurs jingling softly with each step. As he reached the porch, Penelope could see a bruise forming along his jawline and a tear in his shirt sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, reaching out unconsciously to touch the bruise. He caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment. "It's nothing. One of them got in a lucky punch before we subdued him." "Did you? Are they?" She couldn't quite form the question. "No one was killed, if that's what you're asking. We captured 4 of them. The other 2 escaped, but without any cattle. The sheriff from Opal is on his way to collect the prisoners." Martha, who had been watching this exchange with interest, cleared her throat. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are, Dawson. And there's hot water for washing up." He nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Martha. I'll be in shortly." As the older woman retreated to the kitchen, Dawson turned his full attention back to Penelope, still holding her hand in his. "I thought about what we were discussing last night," he said quietly. "All through the ride, the confrontation, the return journey, it was there in my mind." Penelope's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That life is unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. That waiting for the perfect moment is a luxury I can no longer afford." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I find myself thinking of you in ways that go far beyond employer and employee, Penelope. I believe you may feel the same, but if I'm mistaken—" "You're not mistaken," she whispered. His eyes darkened. "Then I'd like your permission to court you properly. Not as a man who once held your indenture papers, but as a man who admires your strength, your intelligence, and your kind heart." Joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected and overwhelming. "I'd like that very much." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features, erasing the weariness of the night. "Then consider this the beginning of something new for both of us." August and September passed in a golden haze of long rides across the ranch, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset, and conversations that lasted well into the night. Dawson courted Penelope with an old-fashioned formality that touched her deeply, bringing her wildflowers gathered during his rides, reading to her from his favorite books, teaching her to shoot a rifle just in case. and always treating her with a respect that made her feel valued in a way she never had before. The other residents of Silver Creek watched this blossoming romance with varying degrees of curiosity and approval. Martha was openly delighted, telling anyone who would listen that it's about time that boy found himself a good woman. Hank maintained a gruff exterior but couldn't hide his pleased smirk whenever he caught the two of them stealing glances at each other across the dinner table. Their first kiss came on a crisp September evening. They had ridden to the stream that had become their special place, spreading a blanket for a simple picnic of cold chicken, bread, and apple pie that Martha had packed for them. "I have something for you," Dawson said as they finished the meal. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small parcel wrapped in tissue paper. Penelope unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a horse, suspended on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the intricate details. "I ordered it from a silversmith in Denver. I wanted you to have something that would remind you of how far you've come since that first riding lesson." He took the necklace from her hands. "May I?" She nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending shivers down her spine. When she turned back to thank him, his face was so close to hers that she could feel his breath on her cheek. "Penelope," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I think I'm falling in love with you." Her heart soared at the words she'd been longing to hear. "I think I'm already there." He cupped her face gently in his hands, as if she were something precious that might break. When his lips finally met hers, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The kiss deepened, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." She smiled, feeling happier than she could ever remember being. "What took you so long, cowboy?" His laugh echoed across the water, startling a nearby deer into flight. "I wanted to be sure. I wanted you to be sure. This isn't just any courtship, Penelope. I'm playing for keeps." The seriousness in his tone made her heart skip. "So am I." As autumn progressed, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden-red transformation of the landscape, Penelope found herself increasingly integrated into the management of the ranch. What had begun as simple housekeeping duties expanded as Dawson recognized her talents for organization and numbers. "These ledgers are immaculate," he said one evening as they sat together in the study, reviewing the accounts. "You have a gift for this. I used to help my father with the books for his shop before." She trailed off, still finding it difficult to speak of those later years. "Before the gambling took over," Dawson finished for her, reaching across the desk to squeeze her hand. "You don't have to protect his memory with me, Penelope. I understand that people can be both loving and deeply flawed at the same time." His understanding was one of the many things she loved about him. Dawson never dismissed her feelings or tried to tell her how she should feel. He simply listened and accepted. Their courtship progressed steadily, with Dawson riding into Opal once a week to send and receive telegrams, always returning with some small gift for Penelope: a book of poetry, a jar of lemon drops, a pair of soft leather gloves for riding. The people of Silver Creek had become her family, and the ranch her home in ways that went beyond mere shelter. In late October, Dawson announced at dinner that he would be making a trip to Denver the following week. "The bank requires my presence for some business matters," he explained. "I should be gone no more than 4 days." Penelope tried to hide her disappointment. 4 days would feel like an eternity after months of seeing him every day. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly here while you're away." He smiled at her across the table. "I know you will. In fact, I've already spoken to Hank about taking directions from you regarding the house and any business matters that might arise." The trust implicit in that arrangement warmed her heart. It was further confirmation of how their relationship had evolved from rescuer and rescued to partners who relied on each other. The morning of Dawson's departure was cold and clear, with frost glittering on the grass and the promise of winter in the air. Penelope rose early to see him off, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she walked with him to the waiting wagon. "I'll be back before you know it," he said, drawing her into his arms for a goodbye kiss that left her breathless. "Be safe," she whispered against his lips. "I'll be counting the hours." He pressed something into her hand before climbing into the wagon. "A little something to remember me by while I'm gone." After the wagon had disappeared down the track toward town, Penelope opened her hand to find a small wooden carving of a wildflower, the same type that had been blooming by the stream during their first ride together. The detail was exquisite, capturing the delicate petals and slender stem. "He's been working on that for weeks," Martha said, appearing beside her. "Whittling away every night after you'd gone to bed." Penelope clutched the carving to her chest, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It was these small gestures, even more than the grand ones, that had won her heart so completely. The first 2 days of Dawson's absence passed uneventfully. Penelope threw herself into her duties, reviewing ledgers, helping Martha with preparations for the coming winter, and riding out each afternoon to check on the nearer pastures as Dawson had taught her to do. On the third day, trouble arrived in the form of Oliver Winthrop. Penelope was alone in the house, Martha having gone to visit her sister in a neighboring homestead, when the sound of an approaching carriage drew her to the window. She recognized Winthrop immediately, the expensive clothes, the imperious posture as he handed the reins to his driver, and felt a chill of apprehension. She considered not answering the door, but Winthrop had already seen her at the window. Steeling herself, she opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Winthrop," she said coolly, "this is unexpected. Miss O'Brien." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're looking well. Country living clearly agrees with you. What brings you to Silver Creek?" "Business with Mr. Calloway. Is he available?" "He's away on business himself. He's expected back tomorrow." She remained in the doorway, not inviting him in. Winthrop's smile faltered slightly. "How unfortunate. Perhaps I could leave a message with you." "Of course. I'd be happy to relay any message when he returns." "It's rather complicated. May I come in?" The October air is a bit brisk for standing on porches. Penelope hesitated. She didn't want this man in Dawson's home, but refusing him entry seemed both rude and potentially problematic. Winthrop was, after all, a powerful man in the territory. "Briefly," she conceded, stepping aside to let him enter. She led him to the parlor rather than Dawson's study, offering him a seat on the sofa while she took a chair opposite, maintaining as much distance as propriety allowed. "Now, what message shall I give Mr. Calloway?" Winthrop leaned back, studying her with an unnerving intensity. "First, I'm curious. How has your arrangement with Calloway progressed? The terms of your indenture were quite specific, as I recall." "Mr. Calloway tore up those papers the day we arrived at Silver Creek," Penelope said, lifting her chin. "I work here as a free woman, with fair wages and respect." "How noble of him." Winthrop's tone suggested he found it anything but. "And is that all there is between you? A simple employer-employee relationship?" The implication in his words made Penelope's cheeks burn. "My relationship with Mr. Calloway is none of your concern, Mr. Winthrop." "Oh, but it is." He leaned forward, all pretense of politeness falling away. "You see, I've had my eye on Silver Creek Ranch for quite some time. The water rights alone make it valuable, but the timber on the North Ridge and the potential for mining operations in the foothills, well, it's quite a prize. I still don't see how any of this involves me. Calloway has refused all my offers to purchase the property. Rather stubbornly, I might add. But I'm a patient man, and I believe in using every advantage available to me. His eyes narrowed. Including the fact that your father's primary debts were to me, not to the bank as you may have been led to believe. Penelope felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. What are you saying? I'm saying that I still hold notes signed by Franklin O'Brien totaling over $3,000. Notes that I could take to the territorial court and have enforced against his estate, which consists solely of you, his only heir. That's impossible. All his debts were settled with the indenture. All the debts that were presented at that time. Winthrop corrected her. I held these back, waiting for the right moment to use them. That moment has arrived. Penelope's mind raced. You're bluffing. Even if such notes exist, Mr. Calloway would pay them rather than see me indentured again. Precisely. Winthrop's smile returned, predatory and cold. Which is why you're going to convince him to sell Silver Creek to me. For a very reasonable price. And if I refuse? Then I'll take these notes to court, have your indenture reinstated, and ensure that you're placed in my household rather than returned to auction. I have friends in the territorial government who would be happy to accommodate such a request. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded document. Here's a copy of one of the notes with your father's signature. Proof that I'm not bluffing. Penelope took the paper with trembling hands. The signature was indeed her father's. She recognized the distinctive flourish he always added to the F in Franklin. The amount stated was for $1,000, dated just 3 months before his death. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Convince Calloway to sell. I've prepared a contract with a more than fair offer. He produced another document from his inside pocket. All he has to do is sign. He'll never agree to it. Then be persuasive, Miss O'Brien. Your future depends on it. Winthrop stood, adjusting his coat. I'll return in 3 days for his answer. If he refuses, or if you warn him of our conversation, the notes go to court immediately. Do I make myself clear? Penelope remained seated, the copy of the note clutched in her hand. Perfectly clear. After Winthrop had gone, she sat unmoving for nearly an hour, the magnitude of her dilemma overwhelming her. She knew Dawson would never willingly sell Silver Creek. It was his heritage, his future, the legacy he intended to pass down to his children someday. But if he refused, Winthrop would use these notes to reclaim her as an indentured servant, and this time, there would be no auction where Dawson could rescue her. She would be bound directly to Winthrop, a man whose reputation with women was whispered about in Opal with fear and disgust. No matter what choice she made, someone would be hurt. If she told Dawson about Winthrop's threat, he would surely try to pay off the debts, potentially bankrupting himself in the process. If she convinced him to sell the ranch, he would lose his birthright. And if she did nothing, she would lose her freedom and any chance of a future with the man she loved. By the time Dawson returned the following evening, Penelope had made her decision. It was the only one she could live with. She greeted him with forced cheerfulness, accepting his embrace and the kiss he pressed to her lips with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. If he noticed her distraction, he attributed it to tiredness after managing the ranch in his absence. I missed you, he said, his arms still around her waist. Every minute. I missed you too. That, at least, was completely true. Later, after supper with the ranch hands and an hour in the study reviewing what had happened during his absence, they found themselves alone on the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the velvet darkness above. You seem troubled tonight, Dawson said, taking her hand as they sat side by side on the porch swing. Is everything all right? This was her moment, her last chance to tell him about Winthrop's visit, to ask for his help, to face the threat together. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she squeezed his hand and forced another smile. Just tired. It's been a busy few days. He studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the window, his expression concerned. There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Penelope looked away, unable to meet his searching gaze. It's nothing important. Penelope. His voice was gentle but insistent. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Haven't we proven that by now? The tenderness in his tone nearly broke her resolve. But she thought of the life he had built here, of all that Silver Creek meant to him, and strengthened her determination. Really, Dawson? I'm fine. Just overwhelmed by everything that's happened these past months. Sometimes it feels like a dream, and I'm afraid I'll wake up back in Opal, facing that auction block again. He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. That's never going to happen. I promise you that. She closed her eyes against the tears that threatened, knowing his promise was one he might not be able to keep. I know. The next morning, Penelope rose before dawn, moving quietly through the sleeping house to Dawson's study. She found paper and pen, and by the weak light of a single lamp, began to write the most difficult letter of her life. She explained about Winthrop's visit, the debt notes he held, and the ultimatum he had presented. She confessed her love for Dawson deeper and more true than she had ever imagined possible, and her absolute refusal to be the cause of him losing Silver Creek. And finally, she told him of her decision to leave, to remove herself from the equation entirely so that Winthrop would have no leverage against either of them. By the time she finished, tears had smudged some of the ink, but the message was clear. She was choosing to sacrifice her happiness to protect his legacy. It was, she believed, the only honorable choice. She sealed the letter and placed it on his desk, where he would find it later that morning. Then she packed her few belongings into a small bag, took the money she had saved from her wages, and slipped out of the house just as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. The walk to town would take most of the day, but she hoped to catch the afternoon stage to Denver. From there, well, she hadn't planned that far ahead. All she knew was that she needed to be far away from Silver Creek before Winthrop returned tomorrow. She had reached the end of the long drive leading to the main road when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw Dawson galloping toward her, his face set in grim determination. He pulled his horse to a stop beside her, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. She clutched her bag tighter. "You weren't supposed to find the letter until later. Martha saw you leaving and woke me. Said you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." He took a step closer. "Which, according to your letter, you are. Then you understand why I have to go." "What I understand is that you're trying to make a decision that affects both of us without consulting me." There was hurt beneath the anger in his voice. "That's not how partnerships work, Penelope. This isn't a partnership. This is me protecting what matters most to you." "And who decided what matters most to me?" He closed the distance between them, taking the bag from her hand and setting it on the ground. "Did it occur to you that you might be what matters most?" Penelope shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "Don't say that. Silver Creek is your birthright, your legacy. I won't be the reason you lose it. Silver Creek is land and timber and cattle. Important, yes. Valuable, certainly, but not irreplaceable." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are. Dawson, please. Winthrop will be back tomorrow. He'll take those notes to court and let him." The fierceness in his tone silenced her. "Do you think I care more about this ranch than I do about you? Do you think so little of what we've built together these past months? I think I love you too much to watch you sacrifice everything for me," she whispered. His expression softened. "And I love you too much to let you walk away thinking it's for my own good." The words hung in the air between them the first time either had said, "I love you," without qualifying it with "I think," or I'm falling. Simple, direct, and irrevocable. I don't know what to do, Penelope admitted, the fight draining out of her. If you don't sell, and you can't pay the debts, then we'll face whatever comes together. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. But there's something you should know about Oliver Winthrop. Something I discovered while I was in Denver. She pulled back slightly to look at him. What? He's in financial trouble. Serious trouble. He's been leveraging his mining operations to buy up land all across the territory. But the new silver vein he was counting on turned out to be much smaller than expected. He's desperate for cash, which is why he's pressuring us now. How do you know this? I had dinner with the president of the Territorial Bank. We got to talking about investment opportunities and Winthrop's name came up. The banker wasn't supposed to share such information, but after a few whiskeys, he became quite forthcoming. A smile touched Dawson's lips. Winthrop is bluffing, Penelope. He needs Silver Creek because he needs the capital it would provide, not because he particularly wants the property. Hope sparked within her. So when he comes tomorrow, we'll be ready for him, together. The next morning, Dawson and Penelope sat side by side in the study, waiting for Winthrop's arrival. They had spent the previous day and evening planning their approach, consulting with a lawyer in town via telegram, and preparing for whatever might come. When the sound of carriage wheels on the drive announced Winthrop's arrival, Dawson squeezed Penelope's hand reassuringly. Remember, let me do the talking at first. She nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. Martha showed Winthrop into the study, her usually friendly demeanor notably absent. Mr. Winthrop to see you, sir, she announced formally before withdrawing and closing the door. Winthrop glanced between Dawson and Penelope, his expression faltering slightly when he saw them together. Calloway, I see Miss O'Brien has informed you of our business proposition. She has. Dawson's voice was calm, revealing nothing. Please have a seat. Winthrop settled into the chair opposite the desk, arranging his features into a mask of professional detachment. And have you had a chance to review the contract I left with her? I have. It's quite detailed. Dawson leaned back in his chair. Before we discuss it further, I'd like to see the original debt notes you claim to hold against Franklin O'Brien's estate. Winthrop reached into his coat, producing several folded documents. As you can see, everything is in order. 3 notes totaling $3,000, all signed by Franklin O'Brien in the year prior to his death. As his only heir, Miss O'Brien is legally responsible for these debts. Dawson examined the notes carefully, paying particular attention to the signatures and dates. After several minutes of silence, he set them on the desk and looked up at Winthrop. These appear to be legitimate, he conceded. However, I find it curious that you chose not to present them during the original settlement of O'Brien's estate. The law requires all creditors to come forward at that time. A regrettable oversight on my part, Winthrop replied smoothly. But as you well know, the law also allows for later recovery when new assets are discovered. In this case, the asset is Miss O'Brien's labor. Actually, Penelope spoke up, finding her voice at last. The law specifically states that creditors who fail to come forward during the initial probate period without due cause forfeit their right to claim against the estate at a later date, especially when those claims would result in indentured service. Winthrop's eyes narrowed. You seem remarkably well versed in territorial law for a seamstress. I've had excellent legal counsel, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Furthermore, Dawson added, we've taken the liberty of reviewing your recent financial activities. Mr. Winthrop, your mines are underproducing, your investments are over-leveraged, and you're facing possible foreclosure on several properties. The color drained from Winthrop's face. That's privileged information. How did you... Let's just say I have friends in banking circles who are concerned about the stability of investments in this territory. Dawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take these debt notes and leave Silver Creek. You will never again attempt to use them or any other means to threaten Miss O'Brien or myself. In return, I will refrain from sharing my knowledge of your financial difficulties with other investors and business owners in the territory. That's blackmail, Winthrop sputtered. No more than your attempt to force the sale of my ranch by threatening Miss O'Brien, Dawson countered. I'd call it a fair exchange. For a moment it seemed Winthrop might refuse. His jaw clenched, and his hands formed fists at his sides. But then reality seemed to assert itself, and his shoulders slumped slightly. Keep the notes, he said bitterly, rising from his chair. They're worthless anyway if I can't enforce them. A wise decision, Dawson said, standing as well. Martha will see you out. When the door closed behind Winthrop, Penelope released the breath she'd been holding. Do you think he'll really let it go? Dawson moved around the desk to take her hands in his. He has no choice. He's fighting for his financial survival right now, and picking a battle with us would only spread word of his troubles faster. Besides, he added with a genuine smile, I may have implied that my banking friends were more influential than they actually are. A laugh bubbled up from deep inside her, partly from relief and partly from admiration for the man standing before her. Dawson Calloway, you are full of surprises. Speaking of surprises, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I was planning to wait for a more romantic moment, but after nearly losing you yesterday, I'm not inclined to wait any longer. Penelope's heart began to race as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. I bought this in Denver, he said softly. I'd planned to ask you on Christmas Eve, but life has a way of changing our plans, doesn't it? Dawson, she whispered, her voice catching on his name. He took the ring from its box and held it poised at the tip of her finger. Penelope O'Brien, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought light and life back to Silver Creek. And to me. Will you marry me? Will you build a future here with me? As my wife, my partner, and my heart's companion. Tears of joy filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, she managed. Yes to all of it. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future, together the challenges they would face, the joys they would share, and the love that would sustain them through it all. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he pressed his forehead to hers. No more secrets, no more trying to protect me by sacrificing yourself. Promise me. I promise, she whispered. From now on, whatever comes, we face it together. The wedding took place on Christmas Eve, just as Dawson had originally planned. The main house at Silver Creek was transformed for the occasion, with pine boughs and red ribbons adorning every doorway, candles glowing in every window, and a massive tree in the parlor decorated with popcorn strings and paper ornaments crafted by Martha and Penelope during the long December evenings. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, with Judge Patterson from Opal officiating. Hank stood as Dawson's best man, while Martha, who had become like a mother to Penelope, gave the bride away. The ranch hands formed a small but enthusiastic congregation, along with a few friends from town who had made the journey despite the winter chill. Penelope wore a dress of ivory silk that Dawson had ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs and a modest train that swept the floor as she walked toward her future husband. She had never felt more beautiful than in that moment, with Dawson's eyes on her, filled with love and pride and a promise of forever. After the ceremony and a feast that showcased Martha's finest cooking, the newly married couple said their goodbyes and retired to the master bedroom, now their shared sanctuary, where a fire crackled in the grate and turned the room golden with its light. Mrs. Calloway, Dawson said softly as he closed the door behind them. "I've been waiting all day to say that." Penelope smiled, still marveling at the ring on her finger and the new name she would carry from this day forward. "I think I'll need some time to get used to it." "We have a lifetime," he assured her, drawing her into his arms. A lifetime of mornings and evenings, summers and winters, joys and challenges, all shared together. The winter passed in a haze of newlywed bliss. Despite the cold that kept them indoors much of the time, Penelope and Dawson found endless ways to enjoy their new life together. They read to each other by firelight, played chess in the study, and planned improvements for the ranch come spring. And in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered the physical expression of their love, each night bringing them closer, binding them together in ways that transcended words. By March, when the first wildflowers began to push through the melting snow, Penelope had fully settled into her role as mistress of Silver Creek. The ranch hands treated her with a mixture of respect and affection, coming to her with their problems and needs as readily as they went to Dawson. Martha had gradually ceded control of the household management, though she remained as cook and trusted advisor. And Dawson consulted Penelope on all aspects of the ranch's operation, valuing her practical intelligence and fresh perspective. In late April, as they prepared for the spring cattle drive to Denver, Penelope made a discovery that would change their lives forever. "I'm with child," she told Dawson one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of pink and gold. He turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Martha suspected first. She noticed the signs before I did. But the doctor in town confirmed it yesterday when I went in for supplies." Dawson fell to his knees before her chair, placing his hand over hers. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby. Due in November, the doctor thinks." She smiled, her free hand reaching to stroke his hair. "Just in time for Thanksgiving." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for this gift, for your love, for everything you've brought to my life." "Our life," she corrected gently. "The one we're building together." The months of Penelope's pregnancy passed with a mixture of excitement and preparation. Dawson insisted on hiring additional help around the house, bringing in a young woman from town named Sarah to take over the heavier cleaning duties. He also began work on a nursery adjoining their bedroom, spending evenings crafting a cradle from cherry wood harvested from the North Ridge. The birth came in the early hours of November 22, 1877, after a labor that lasted through the night. Martha and the midwife from Opal attended Penelope, while Dawson paced the hallway outside, alternately praying and cursing as his wife's cries echoed through the house. Just as dawn was breaking, a new cry joined the chorus, the healthy wail of a newborn taking his first breath. When Martha finally opened the door to let him in, Dawson rushed to Penelope's side to find her exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "You have a son," she said, her voice weary but triumphant. Dawson stared at the red-faced infant, overcome with emotion. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy hair that already showed signs of being as dark as his own. "What shall we name him?" Penelope asked, watching the love bloom on her husband's face. Dawson considered for a moment. "How about Franklin, after your father?" Tears welled in Penelope's eyes at the unexpected suggestion. Despite everything, she had loved her father, and the gesture of forgiveness and honor in Dawson's suggestion touched her deeply. "Franklin Daniel Calloway," she decided, incorporating Dawson's middle name as well. "A good, strong name for our son." Life at Silver Creek adjusted to accommodate its newest resident. Franklin, called Frank by everyone except his mother, who insisted on his full name, was a good-natured baby who quickly became the center of attention for the entire ranch. The rough cowboys who had once seemed intimidating to Penelope now melted at the sight of the infant, fashioning toys from wood scraps and volunteering to rock him when he was fussy. As Frank grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered under Dawson and Penelope's joint management. They expanded the herd, added new pastureland to the south, and built a schoolhouse for the children of the ranch hands, with plans for Frank to attend when he was old enough. In the spring of 1880, when Frank was 2.5 years old, Penelope discovered she was expecting their second child. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and on Christmas morning of that year, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha, after Dawson's mother and the woman who had become family to them both. The years flowed by with the rhythm of the seasons, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Frank grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did, while Elizabeth Lizzie to her family was a spirited girl with her mother's determination and her father's easy laugh. Opal grew from a small settlement into a proper town, with a railroad spur connecting it to Denver by 1882. Silver Creek Ranch expanded its operations to include a small timber business using the abundant pine on the North Ridge, providing additional income during the winter months when cattle work was slower. Through it all, Penelope and Dawson's partnership deepened, their love strengthening with each passing year. They faced the inevitable hardships of ranch life: drought years, harsh winters, cattle disease, with the same unity and resolve they had shown in confronting Winthrop years earlier. In the summer of 1886, 10 years after Penelope had stood trembling on the auction block in Opal, she and Dawson returned to the town courthouse for a very different purpose. The old building had been renovated, its dark wood polished to a shine, new windows letting in the bright Colorado sunshine. "Are you ready?" Dawson asked, offering his arm as they climbed the steps. Penelope nodded, smoothing the skirt of her blue silk dress, a far cry from the threadbare garment she'd worn a decade earlier. "More than ready." Inside, they were greeted by Judge Patterson, now white-haired but still sharp-eyed. "Mr. and Mrs. Calloway," he said warmly. "Right on time." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. With their signatures on the appropriate documents, Dawson and Penelope formally adopted 12-year-old twins Michael and Mary, whose parents' longtime ranch hands at Silver Creek had been killed in a flash flood earlier that year. "You are now legally Calloways," Dawson told the solemn-faced children as they left the courthouse. "But you've been family in our hearts since the day you were born." The twins exchanged glances, then broke into matching smiles. "Does this mean we can call you Pa now?" Michael asked Dawson. "Instead of boss?" Dawson's throat tightened with emotion. "I'd be honored." The expanded Calloway family returned to Silver Creek that afternoon, where Frank, now 9, and Lizzie, 6, waited anxiously on the porch with Martha. The older woman had slowed considerably in recent years, but her mind remained sharp, and her love for the family undiminished. "Well?" Frank demanded as the wagon pulled up. "Is it official?" "It's official," Penelope confirmed, helping Mary down from the wagon. "Meet your new sister and brother, officially Calloways now and forever." That evening, as the children played in the yard and Martha supervised from her rocking chair on the porch, Dawson led Penelope to their special spot by the stream. The setting sun turned the water to liquid gold, and the wildflowers, the same type he had carved for her so many years ago, nodded in the gentle breeze. 10 years, he said softly, his arm around her waist as they stood watching the water flow. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you standing on that auction block. Other times, it feels like you've always been part of my life." Penelope leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his shoulder. "That day was my darkest hour. I thought my life was over." She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "Instead, it was just beginning." Our beginning, he corrected, echoing words she had spoken years before. Yes, she agreed, stretching up to kiss him. Our beginning. And what a wonderful story it's turning out to be. As twilight descended over Silver Creek Ranch, casting long shadows across the land that had become their kingdom, Dawson and Penelope Calloway walked hand in hand toward home, toward the family they had built together, toward the future that stretched before them rich with promise, secure in love, and filled with the joy that comes from facing life's challenges side by side. The auction that had once been Penelope's greatest fear had become, through Dawson's compassion and their shared courage, the first chapter in a love story that would echo through generations of Calloways yet to come. A story of redemption, of second chances, and of the healing power of love in the wild heart of the Colorado frontier.